Rumours of a ghostly presence and possible murder now haunt this island off the coast of Queensland. These are the ghost stories from our own backyard, so sit down, dim the lights as I tell you the story of Savannah, the ghost of Lady Elliot Island. Lady Elliot Island is located off the coast of Queensland. It is a popular tourist destination due to it being close to the Great Barrier Reef, and it is also diverse in marine and bird life. But there is something else that resides at this island. In 1816, Captain Thomas Stewart named the island after his ship, the Lady Elliot, and there has been many shipwrecks along the island. People once referred to it as Shipwreck Island. Early sailors who visited the island were so afraid to come ashore. This was due to the rumours of wailing and crying that could be heard in the night. People believed that it was the cries of those that had perished in the shipwrecks. But there is one particular spirit that is the most notable, and her story dates back to the early 1900s. When an Irish woman called Savannah McKee, her husband Tom and their 4 sons moved to the Lady Elliot Island, and Tom took the position as the new lighthouse keeper. As the island was off the mainland, food and medical supplies would arrive late, and the living conditions was really cramped for the family. It was an isolated existence, and they would hardly see anyone outside of their own family. Eventually, the youngest son went off to boarding school, and the isolation became too much for Savannah. In April 1907, Savannah got up one day and dressed in her best clothing, and no one but her knew what was about to happen. She walked to the jetty at the end of the lighthouse. The air was damp and the waves were crashing viciously. She ended her life at 59 years old by throwing herself into the ocean. News of her death began to circulate on the mainland, and there were rumours that her husband Tom was the one to push her off. But with no witnesses, this could never be proven. Her body eventually washed up on shore and she was buried in this small cemetery. She was buried next to the daughter of a previous lighthouse keeper, who died from pneumonia 10 years before. Since her death, people have reported that she still wanders the island, trapped in the place she hated so much. Go to part 2. A poltergeist terrorised an Australian family for 4 months. These are the ghost stories from our own backyard. So sit down, dim the lights as I tell you the story of the Humpty Doo poltergeist. In 1997, a young couple, Jill and Dave, moved into their new home at Humpty Doo, located near Darwin in the Northern Territory. And they lived a relatively normal life at first in their new home. But it wasn't until 1998 when Kirsty, Andrew and their nearly 1-year-old daughter moved into the home as well. This is when the families began to experience some paranormal activity. Batteries, spanners, shards of glass, bottles and even knives would be thrown across the room from an unknown source. Gravel and stones would also appear out of nowhere and would often fall from the ceiling. The families believed that they were under attack. The families also claimed that the entity would try and contact them with gravel, leaving words such as car, fire, skin, help and Troy. The families believed that this particular instance was reference to their friend Troy, who died in a car accident just a couple of miles away from the home. It was almost like the entity was tormenting them. As the activity increased, the families could hear scratching on the walls. Jill said that it completely freaked us out. It was like something was in the walls right next to us. We couldn't sleep, we were crying. We would have left the house, but we had nowhere else to go. Their story began to circulate amongst the locals, and eventually caught the attention of the media. A priest was even called in to inspect the home, and he said that he experienced a knife flying towards him, but it stopped before it reached him and fell to the floor. Many more priests were called in to help the family, but this only aggravated the entity even more. It even threw a crucifix around the house that one of the priests left behind. One of the oldest bridges in Australia is said to be haunted by a cruel, ghostly figure and his dog. These are the ghost stories from our own backyard. So sit down, dim the lights as I tell you the story of the ghost of Richmond Bridge. Richmond Bridge is located in Richmond, Tasmania, and construction began in 1823. It was built by convict labour so that convicts could be transported faster between Port Arthur and Hobart. However, the bridge is rumoured to be haunted by an ex-convict called George Grover. George was sent to Australia from England for stealing, and was known to be rather aggressive and a bully. In 1832, George had completed his incarceration and was put in charge of overseeing the convicts whose job was to collect sandstone for the bridge. He was also in charge of administrating the floggings. He was known to be cruel to the convicts in his care, and he became very disliked by them, which ultimately led to his death. Drunk one night, George fell asleep at Richmond Bridge. Word spread to the other convicts, and they came up with a plan. They went to the bridge and attacked George. He was murdered and then thrown into the water below. No one was ever convicted for his death. Since then, George's ghost has been spotted at the bridge staring at people. He is quite a negative spirit and sometimes will follow you home. People often feel that they are being watched as they cross the bridge at night. Also been reports of a ghostly black and white dog at the bridge. He has become known as Grover's dog. The dog appears usually after dark on the bridge and materialises before lone women and children. People think that the dog is a friendly spirit and a protector of the bridge, perhaps protecting people from Grover's ghost. One lady has reported seeing the dog at her side on several occasions. It would walk alongside her from one side of the bridge to the other and would disappear as quickly as it had come. A ghost of a sailor is said to haunt one of the rooms of Sydney's most haunted hotel. These are the ghost stories from our own backyard, so sit down, dim the lights as I tell you about the hauntings of the Russell Hotel. The Russell Hotel was built in 1887, but the history of the site dates back even further. The hotel was actually built on the grounds of an old convict hospital, dating back to around 1788. Many people died in this hospital, particularly during the time of the bubonic plague in Sydney. During the Russell Hotel's history, it was once a shopfront, a public house called Patent Slip Inn, and then a hotel in 1887, and an unofficial brothel. It was then renovated in the 1980s, becoming the Russell Hotel we know today. During the years, there was a number of deaths and murders that occurred behind the walls, including a sailor that was murdered by a prostitute in room 8. The hotel's past is said to contribute to the paranormal energy in the building, but room 8 is said to be the most active. A ghost of a sailor is said to manifest and show himself at the foot of the bed of lone sleeping women. He just stares at them and sometimes calling out to his lost love. Other areas of the hotel are also said to be active. In room 20, guests have experienced hearing screaming throughout the night, or the feeling that they are being held down to the bed by their sheets. A lot of the guests have even checked out the next day from room 20 because of this. The downstairs area of the hotel also has paranormal activity, with people claiming to have seen an apparition of a woman in white. People believe she may either be a nurse or a maid. Guests of the hotel have also reported hearing disembodied voices and screams, temperature drops, and electronics turning on and off by themselves, and just a general feeling of uneasiness. If you're interested in the haunted history of Sydney, then the Russell Hotel is the perfect place to stay, and maybe you'll experience the paranormal for yourself. This beach in South Australia is said to be haunted by a shark attack victim. These are the ghost stories from our own backyard, so sit down, dim the lights as I tell you the story of the Brighton Beach ghost. In March 1926, South Australia suffered its first fatal shark attack in the 20th century, and this occurred at Brighton Beach. Kitty White was a beloved children's swimming teacher. She was also known in her community for being awarded the Grand Diploma of the Royal Life-Saving Society for saving a drowning woman. Kitty White was on holidays in Brighton with her 2 young children. On the day of her death, Miss White had finished a swimming lesson with the local children. After the lesson had finished, she decided to go back into the water. Mr. Harry Southcott, who was sitting on the jetty at the time, began to hear screaming. He witnessed Kitty struggling in the water, and soon the water around her turned red. Mr. Southcott and another local, Mr. Trott, attempted to save Kitty by pulling her into the jetty. And when they arrived ashore, a doctor was called. But unfortunately, Kitty White died on her way to hospital from massive trauma and blood loss. Since Kitty's death in 1926, a young woman has often been spotted along the shore or along the pier. Witnesses claim that they watched the young lady jump into the water, but disappears from sight before becoming submerged. Another story comes from 2 young men who were walking along Brighton Beach, and in the distance they saw a blonde woman running towards them, but they claimed that she was wearing clothes that didn't match the era, and before she got to them, she completely disappeared. Could this be the spirit of Kitty White? Do you know about this place in Australia that is haunted by horses? The Kangaroo Hotel, located in Malden, Victoria, first opened in the 1860s, and it started off as a tent. It also operated as a butcher, doctors, theatre, changing station, and even the town's morgue. But there is one tragic tale that haunts this location. During the time it was a Cobb & Co changing station, the nearby stables went up in flames, and from within the stables, the horrific sounds of frantic horses echoed throughout the night. 10 horses perished in the fire and are now said to haunt the yard where the stables once stood. Guests have reported hearing the stamping of horse feet and even feeling a warm breath or a heavy body brush past them. The Kangaroo Hotel has a long history, and one thing is for certain, the ghosts of the gold rush can still be felt today. Have you ever been to this haunted pub in Melbourne? These are the ghost stories from our own backyard. So sit down, dim the lights, as I tell you about the Mitre Tavern's ghostly love story. The Mitre Tavern is one of Melbourne's most oldest pubs. It opened in 1868, but was said to have been built sometime before the 1850s. Mr. Henry Thompson became the first of many publicans at the Mitre Tavern, with his successful application for a liquor licence. And it has remained as a tavern for over 140 years. Did you know that the hardware store Mitre 10 was also named after this tavern? However, there is a darker story that comes from this building. The tavern is said to be haunted by the ghost of Connie Waugh, who was rumoured to have hung herself in the tavern after being rejected from her love. Patrons have reported feeling cold breezes across their cheek, disembodied singing and bursts of light, and even a ghostly woman often seen on the top level of the Mitre Tavern. But who is Connie and how true is her story? Connie Waugh was actually her stage name. Her real name was Alice Constance Waugh, but we will refer to her as Connie. Connie was a working class actress and often worked at the old Theatre Royal. And it's rumoured that she met Rupert Clarke at the theatre. Rupert Clarke was a part of one of Melbourne's most wealthiest and prominent families, and they had an affair while Rupert's wife Amy and his children remained in London. In 1902, when Rupert went to visit his wife and children, Amy had noticed a change in him and eventually found out about Connie, so she filed for divorce. Connie and Rupert's affair lasted for about 7 years, and the affair between these two was not discreet. They were often seen publicly together and would often visit the Mitre Tavern. Rupert even brought Connie a house in St Kilda. The story of Connie's ghost ends with Connie taking her life at the Mitre Tavern after Rupert broke up with her. Connie's last documented location was in the 1950s, and no death record was ever found. People don't really know why and when these stories began. Is the ghostly presence at the Mitre Tavern actually Connie Waugh, or is it another woman's lost story? This town in Queensland is said to be haunted by the ghost of a grey lady. These are the ghost stories from our own backyard. So sit down, dim the lights, as I tell you about the Grey Lady of Roma. The idea of a grey lady ghost is not uncommon, but this story is particularly strange. Roma is a rural town located in Queensland. In the late 1800s and before his death in 1922, James Laylaw was an important part of the Roma community. He was the owner of the Gubba Ramunda station. In the late 1800s, James Laylaw gave a man who worked for him permission to build on his land. That man's name was Mr. Bonner. The land was located behind the Roma Hospital, and Mr. Bonner built a small cottage for him and his wife. And the locals took quite an interest in Miss Bonner. She was described as expressionless, and was often seen wearing a grey dress. However, the Bonners completely disappeared one day, leaving food in their pantry and their cat behind. For a while, the cottage behind the Roma Hospital remained empty, until a man named Johnson moved in with his family, and things began to get really strange. The family said that there was an eerie atmosphere in the cottage, as though there was a presence that moved about, silent and unseen. One of Johnson's daughters, Tilly, became extremely ill, and had to go to hospital for an operation. And when she got home, she was put to bed immediately, covered in bandages. The next morning, she was described as being agitated and confused, and said that during the night she had been visited by a grey lady, and that the lady told her to take off all her bandages if she wanted to get well. The day went by until the afternoon, when her mother came back to check on her. She was found unconscious in her blood-soaked bed with her bandages removed. She unfortunately passed away before the doctor arrived. But the tale of the Grey Lady does not end there. Around the same time of Tilly's passing, her older sister was leaving the house on a date. As they were leaving, the young man had a sudden urge to look back at the cottage, and stood at the cottage in the moonlight was the Grey Lady staring back at him. He immediately bolted away, getting stuck in barbed wire in the process. The family then moved out after becoming terrified of the Grey Lady ghost. Since then, the Grey Lady ghost has been spotted by many of the locals, walking towards the hospital in the area of where the old cottage once stood. She was hit by a train and is now rumoured to haunt this tunnel. These are the ghost stories from our own backyard. So sit down, dim the lights as I tell you the story of Emily Bollard. Picton is a small historic town located in New South Wales, Australia. Within Picton, there is a tunnel called the Mushroom Tunnel, and this tunnel has a lot of history. It was originally built as a railway tunnel. It was also used to store mustard gas and ammunition in World War II. Many local residents have also accidentally died or taken their own life in this tunnel. But there is one ghostly tale that is associated with these stone walls, and it involves a 51-year-old woman called Emily Bollard. In 1916, Emily was on her way through the tunnel to visit her sister in a neighbouring town, but was hit and killed by a train early in the morning. People are unsure if it was an accident or if Emily took her own life. But ever since that fatal night, people have reported seeing a ghostly figure in a white flowing dress with no face. There has also been reports of bright lights floating above people's heads, sudden drops in temperature, black shadows, the sound of crying, and many other strange things that happen inside the tunnel. Do you believe Emily's spirit still resides here? A zookeeper was attacked and killed and is now rumoured to haunt this Australian zoo. These are the ghost stories from our own backyard. So sit down, dim the lights as I tell you the story of the Adelaide Zoo ghosts. The Adelaide Zoo is located in Adelaide, South Australia. It opened in May 1883 and is the second oldest zoo in Australia. And in its 140 years of operation, the Adelaide Zoo has seen its fair share of abuse, dark events and tragedies, including a bloody animal massacre committed by two evil youths who brutally slaughtered 64 animals in 1985. And in 2005, a boy was impaled by a fence post after stealing ice cream from a vending machine. And we can't ignore the fact that 20th century zoos were usually unethical and would often feature small cages and unnatural habitats. But there is one event that is said to have left a ghostly presence in the zoo. In 1920, a zookeeper named Samuel May met his end after many altercations with the animals in his supervision. One sunny day, Samuel May was hosing off one of the polar bears in his care, in an attempt to keep it cool. However, the polar bear launched through the bars at him and ripped his arm clean off. Samuel yelled out in pain and said, "It is all up with me, I am gone." He eventually collapsed in a pool of his own blood. He was rushed to hospital but passed away the following day. It is the ghost of Samuel May who is said to now haunt the Adelaide Zoo. A shadowy figure has been seen close to where he was attacked. This mysterious figure has even been mistaken as a zookeeper attending to his animals. Another mysterious figure has also been seen at the Minchin House at Adelaide Zoo, which was the original residence of the zoo directors. A woman dressed in this style of clothing has been seen in the building. She is said to keep watch over the residents. Perhaps she is the wife or daughter of an early zoo director. By day, the Adelaide Zoo is a beloved tourist attraction, but by night, a presence can be felt in the zoo. It is rumoured that this ghost saved an entire theatre from burning down. These are the ghost stories from our own backyard. So sit down, dim the lights as I tell you the story of Fred, the Theatre Royal ghost. The Theatre Royal is a historic performing arts venue in Hobart, Tasmania. It dates back to 1837 and was designed by Peter de Graves. But the theatre's location was openly criticised by the upper class, as it was situated near brothels, public houses, workers' cottages and factories. Inside the theatre and beneath the auditorium was a tavern that was known to be notoriously rowdy. In 1984, a fire broke out inside the theatre and almost completely destroyed it. But it's said that the building's famous ghost that goes by the name Fred saved the theatre from burning down, as the fire curtain was mysteriously dropped while no one was in the building early in the morning, and it actually contained the flames from spreading any further. There are a few stories of who this ghostly presence might be. Some people believe he was an actor that died during a performance, while others believe he was killed in a brawl in the old tavern below. Fred tends to make his presence known to those that stay after hours. Disembodied footsteps have been heard, people have been poked, and he has been seen many times walking down the aisles by workers in old-fashioned clothes and taking a seat before he disappears. He's also been heard calling actors' names from backstage, and many actors have claimed to have spotted Fred watching them off stage during rehearsals. However, Fred is known to be a positive spirit that likes to call the Theatre Royal his home.
On Christmas in my town, children go missing. For the last 3 Christmases, without fail, the worst has happened. A child has gone missing. I remember it like it were yesterday. Parents used to let their kids play freely in the icy snow outside, and now it's just empty. Children can't be children. There were no Christmas trees, Christmas carols. It just became a sad holiday in my town. The first to disappear was Tommy Graham. He was 11 years old, and although I'd seen him around, I didn't really know him personally. I remember my mother crying about it. Just the thought of something terrifying happening to a child distressed her greatly. That Christmas, my dad held on to me tighter than he had ever before. The following year, another Christmas came and another child was taken. Her name was Cheryl, and she was only 4 years old. And just like Tommy the year before, little Cheryl was never found. Despite everything that was going on, it wasn't until the 3rd child disappeared that I was truly heartbroken. His name was Finn, and he was one of my friends. We lived on the same street. We would walk to school together each day. My dad used to take us to the cinema most Sundays. Finn was like part of the family, and I still think about him to this day. Where would he have been now? What would he have done in his life? What happened to my best friend? Every Christmas, children in my town go missing. This is part 2. If you missed part 1, go back and watch that. It was finally December, and my dad told me that he had a surprise for me. From behind his back, he pulled out an advent calendar. Every year, my dad got me an advent calendar. But this year, he was worried he wasn't going to be able to find one. Most of the shops were selling out of them really quickly. Being the dad he was, he spent hours driving around town looking for one until he found one for me. And it was December 1st, which means I get to open one right now. I was excited to open it, but I couldn't help think about my friend Finn. He loved advent calendars too. I started to cry, and my dad comforted me until I fell asleep. I had completely forgotten to open the first door of the advent calendar. When I fell asleep, I began to have nightmares. It was a horrific dream about him and the other kids that went missing. The first thing I looked at was the advent calendar, with its cute little hand-drawn houses covered in snow. But almost immediately, I noticed that something wasn't quite right about the advent calendar. The door to the first night was wide open. I hadn't opened it. I climbed out of bed to get a closer look at what was behind the door. I should have just stayed in bed because what I saw next was horrifying. Candyman is real. This story is so bizarre, it feels like there's no way that it's true, but it is. On the quiet night of April 22nd, 1987, within the walls of a small apartment complex, one woman's life will be changed forever. Her name was Ruthie. Ruthie always felt like there was something strange about her apartment, especially her bathroom mirror. But that night, her worst fears came to life. She heard a loud sound coming from her bathroom. She called 911. She screamed to the dispatcher, "They're coming through my bathroom mirror." They threw the cabinet down. At this point, the dispatcher is like, they must be delusional. Unbeknownst to the dispatcher, the narrow passageways between old apartments are perfect for burglars. They would push bathroom cabinets out of the wall to break in. Around the same time, there was a legend going around town about the Candyman. But this Candyman wasn't just a normal burglar. Suddenly, Ruthie saw the shadow of a tall man. And you guessed it, it was the Candyman. I'm out of time, so you're gonna have to go to part 2. The Candyman is real. Part 2, if you missed part 1, go back and watch that. The last thing I told you is Ruthie saw the Candyman in her house. Ruthie heard gunshots. The neighbors heard it too. But even though she called the police and made the report, the police didn't go inside. 2 long days passed. And then the cops finally went into the apartment. What they found was horrifying. When they finally opened the door, Ruthie's lifeless body lay there on the floor. She had been shot 4 times. The terrifying reality was setting in. Candyman was real, and by the time the cops got there, her killer was gone. The police claimed that the reason they took so long to go in was because they feared lawsuits because her door was locked. Even though she called the police, come on. Thus, the legend of Candyman was born. Now they say if you play the game Candyman, he will come out of the mirror and get you. And if you want to hear about the game that you should not play, go to my next video. But seriously, don't play it. Something really weird happened to me at Target. Like, there might be something creepy going on there. It was late at night after work and I was getting a bunch of items. It wasn't all that busy, so things were going pretty smoothly. I had been shopping for about 30 minutes and my cart was almost full. There was just a few more items that I needed to grab. And I was in the last section that I needed to go to, the cold section. There was nobody else in the freezer section at all. I I reached down to grab some whipped cream and I saw something move in the corner of my eye. It looked like something was leaned up against the items in this section of the store, but it was moving. That's when I realized there was a person back there. And this person wasn't wearing the typical red shirt and khakis of a Target worker. They were wearing all black. But the weirdest part is that they had a black ski mask on. I tried to ignore him and move further down in the aisle, but he moved with me. He was staring at me from the other side, but luckily I only needed one more item. But as I went to grab the last item, the ski mask guy shoved all of the merchandise at me through the freezer. I started to pick them up to put them all back, and the guy took off running, so I decided I was going to tell a Target employee about what was going on. I found an employee and she said that there's some back doors that sometimes kids sneak through or whatever, so she would go tell them to leave. She went in the back and then came back out and said she couldn't find anybody and that they must have left, so I continued shopping. I finished my shopping and left, not expecting to ever see that man again. But about a week later, I went back to Target, my normal grocery shopping a week. I did my grocery shopping, everything was normal, I checked out and I started driving home. On the way home, I saw a figure jump out from behind a bush. And it was the same man in the same outfit with the same ski mask. I didn't return to Target for 2 weeks, but when I did, things got even weirder. Something scary is going on at Target. This is part 2. If you missed part 1, go back and watch that. So a few weeks later, I returned to the same Target. I get my groceries and I drive home and nothing happened. I start unloading my groceries and I had to park on the street by my house. So I'm starting to unload the groceries and I'm on the street and I noticed that there's a car parked like really close to me that also just pulled up. First, I thought that the car was empty, but then I saw something move in the back passenger seat. Someone climbed up to the front seat. When I tell you my jaw dropped, it was the freaking guy in the ski mask. At this point, this is way too close to my house. Like, this is borderline a stalking scenario. And he was just staring at me. He opened his door. I'm like stuck in shock at this point. He starts walking over to my car and that's when the panic sets in. So I lock my car doors. Then he tried to open my driver's side door. When he realized it was locked, he just pressed his face against my driver's side window. I started yelling at him to go away, leave me alone. I put my car in reverse and started backing up, and this guy just held onto my car. Finally, he let go and he ran back to the car that he came from. I took off down a side street because I couldn't go home, then he would know where I live. When I was sure that I lost him, I returned home. I haven't been to Target since. If you don't believe in ghosts, you will after this. The other night, I stayed at a place called Hill House. And for those of you who don't know, I'm a professional ghost hunter. So I go to haunted houses all the time. There's a lot of places that people claim is haunted. There might be a ghost here, there might not. This place should have been called Hell House because it was full of demons. When we get there, the guy who owns it starts telling us these stories. Like how his wife won't even enter the house anymore because of an experience that she had. There has been 5 possessions. Not only is the house haunted, but they also bring in haunted items. So when I tell you, this guy spent like an hour telling us all the insane stuff that happened in this house, I was kind of like, I don't know if I believe this. But after my experience, I believe every story that he told us. Let me tell you about my experience in the house. This place is located in Mineral Wells, Texas. I was not planning on going, and last minute one of my friends canceled. At first when I arrived, I was like, this is kind of like giving a positive vibe. It turns out I was at the wrong house. Also almost stole someone's cat. Each room holds its own spirit or demon apparently, and they all have cameras on the entire night. So you know that they aren't faking this because you can see literally every angle of the house. I'm shocked that this place isn't more well known. One of the spirits is Jacob, and you might recognize this photo because it's a pretty viral ghost photo. He kind of looks like the kid from Insidious in my opinion. But the people who took this swear that there was no boy there, and it is in fact a ghost. Some people think that Jacob is a demon, not a ghost. Another one of the ghosts is Priscilla, and she's supposed to be this little girl ghost. She also supposedly has the easiest room. I, the logical thinker that I am, suggested that we start there, but no. My friends did not want to start in the easy room. They wanted to start in the axe room. You want to know why it's called the axe room? Because a freaking axe flew across the room on its own. That's why it's called the axe room. Oh, also, people have literally been dragged out of this house. Like, you literally can't do that to yourself. Like, how? How would you do that to yourself? Anyways, we go into the axe room and our equipment starts going off, so we're starting to ask questions. And then the obelisk says blog and used. And I'm like, does that mean it doesn't like that we're filming? And then there is a bang so loud that the entire house shakes. And we have this on camera. We're like, it's fine. Like, that's not the worst thing that we've ever experienced. But then the guy is listening to all of the cameras and sending us EVPs. And I'm sitting next to something called the portal room, which, by the way, is like a portal. Yeah. If you take a picture in it, then supposedly this girl's gonna show up in your photo. I'm sitting next to that room and I start to feel like something is choking me. So I'm freaking out and we get a text. And it's a message from the guy that says, got an EVP. And guess what the EVP says? Just listen to it. Yeah. Okay, so I'm terrified and I'm like, oh, I'm so scared. So I run and I go next to Kaylee. Well, Kaylee has had a demonic attachment before, so that's a whole nother rabbit hole that we have to go down sometime. And then there's a huge bang towards Jacob's room, the demon that I mentioned before, by the way. And by this time it's like 2 a.m. We're out of time and I gotta rinse this out, so like for part 2.